Started the recording for this open meeting in compliance with the CMS guidelines. For the record, prior to doing so, I announced that Palmetto GBA will make an audio recording of the open meeting. Palmetto GBA only recognizes the Teams webinar recording that will be posted on the Palmetto GBA website as the accurate and reliable record of this meeting. Please note a small change to the agenda. Dr. Tad Shodel will be added as the last speaker. He was originally registered to speak at the morning JM meeting and was rescheduled due to a conflict. We will now begin with the registered presenters. Before we start, I'd like to remind each presenter to please adhere to the allotted 15-minute time limit. This will help us stay on schedule and ensure every registered speaker has the opportunity to be heard. At this time, we will go ahead and start with Dr. Garza. Please go ahead and share with us.
Great. Can you hear me all right?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Perfect. Okay. So first of all, thank you for the opportunity to speak today. My name is Dr. Philip Garza. I am an ophthalmologist in Atlanta with a practice focused on glaucoma surgery and cataract surgery. I care for Medicare beneficiaries across the full spectrum of glaucoma, including patients already losing vision from a chronic, progressive, and irreversible disease. Glaucoma damages the optic nerve. Our principal modifiable treatment target is intraocular pressure, or IOP, the pressure inside the eye. When IOP is not controlled reliably, patients can permanently lose peripheral vision, then central vision, and then their independence. The foundational evidence is clear. The ocular hypertension treatment study, or OATS, showed that lowering IOP reduces progression from ocular hypertension to glaucoma. The early manifest glaucoma trial, or EMGT, showed that IOP reduction delays progression of established glaucoma. The collaborative initial glaucoma treatment study, or CIGITS, showed that patients missing medication more frequently experience substantially greater visual field loss. So the premise is not controversial. Sustained eye pressure control protects vision, and treatment interruptions are not benign. I am not asking for unrestricted use of the travoprost intracameral implant in every patient. I am asking that the proposed LCD preserve physician-directed flexibility when topical therapy, selective laser trabeculoplasty, or stage surgery is not the right pathway for an individual Medicare beneficiary. The evidence supporting these objections is far broader than I can review today. After this open meeting, I will submit formal written comments by email with a supplemental evidence exhibit attached, organized slide by slide around the points I will summarize today. Slide 2, please. This is the front of my own glaucoma drop instruction sheet I give patients. I included it because it shows the practical reality of glaucoma care. Many patients must manage several bottles, different schedules, and additional dry eye drops. A regimen may include one medication at bedtime, another twice daily, another 3 times daily, and artificial tears in between. Patients must separate and instill the drops correctly every day, often indefinitely. That may be manageable for some patients, but many Medicare beneficiaries have arthritis, tremor, poor vision, memory impairment, caregiver dependence, or cost barriers. This is not patient failure. It is a predictable limitation of a delivery system that depends on near-perfect daily human behavior. OKK and colleagues demonstrated this in the Travatan dosing aid study using electronic monitoring. Even when medication was free and patients knew they were being monitored, nearly 45% used their drops less than 75% of the time. That is why a failed topical trial is not always a clean pharmacologic trial. Often the molecule has not failed, the delivery system has failed. Slide 3, please. Topical medications and selective laser trabeculoplasty, or SLT, are both established first-line treatments. SLT is an office-based laser intended to improve fluid outflow through the eye's natural drainage structure. I use both drops and SLT every day. This is not an argument against either. But accepted first-line options should not become a rigid sequence that every patient must fail before another reasonable treatment can be covered. The laser in glaucoma and ocular hypertension trial, known as the LIGHT trial, was a pivotal randomized trial supporting SLT as an effective first-line glaucoma treatment option. Based in part on LIGHT, the 2024 American Academy of Ophthalmology Technology Assessment describes SLT as an acceptable primary replacement, or adjunctive therapy. That supports flexibility, not a compulsory gate before a treatment with a different mechanism and purpose. Drops provide pharmacologic eye pressure reduction but depend on patient behavior. SLT avoids daily adherence but depends on individual biologic response through the native trabecular outflow pathway, and its effect is not uniformly durable or uniformly existent. The travoprost intracameral implant, by contrast, delivers reliable, sustained prostaglandin therapy without daily topical administration. These treatments are not interchangeable, they solve different problems. The proposed LCD asks, has the patient failed drops, then failed SLT? The better question is this treatment reasonable and necessary given disease severity, target pressure, adherence risk, ocular surface status, and physician judgment? Slide 4, please. Slide 4 addresses topical drop reliability and adherence, the heart of the problem. The proposed LCD requires failure of at least 2 topical medications unless narrow exceptions apply. But the real-world problem is not limited to somebody physically incapable of placing any drop. Many patients can technically administer a drop but cannot do so reliably, consistently, or comfortably enough over years to protect vision. The CIGIT's adherence analysis is particularly relevant here. Patients who never missed doses had only modest visual field loss. Those missing medication more frequently had markedly greater loss, including more than 2 decibels in the least adherent group. In glaucoma, mistreatment can mean permanent retinal ganglion cell loss, optic nerve damage, and permanent vision loss. If pressure remains above goal on a topical prostaglandin, the reason may be true pharmacologic non-response, but it may also be missed doses, poor installation, cost, pharmacy access, side effects, confusion, or need to place several drops back to back. Requiring a second topical failure may therefore repeat the same flawed experiment while the optic nerve remains at risk of ongoing irreversible vision loss. A patient who cannot reliably use topical prostaglandin therapy has not proven that prostaglandin therapy is inappropriate. The patient has shown that topical delivery is unreliable. Slide 5, please. Adherence is only one limitation of topical medication. The second is tolerability. Glaucoma drops cause burning, redness, tearing, allergy, periocular dermatitis, and worsening ocular surface disease for many patients. Benzalkonium chloride, or BAK, is a common eye drop preservative that can contribute to chronic inflammation and tear film instability. This affects comfort, adherence, clinical measurements, and future surgical planning. The Preservative Exposure and Surgical Outcomes Study, or PESO study, by Boehmer and colleagues, linked greater cumulative exposure to BAK-preserved glaucoma medications with a higher risk of trabeculectomy failure later on. Trabeculectomy is a traditional filtration operation used for advanced glaucoma. I do not cite that study to argue against drops. They remain essential for many patients. The point is that chronic exposure to medicated eye drops is not biologically neutral. A sustained release, preservative-free intracameral approach can reduce topical burden and ocular surface exposure. The LCD's exception for severe intolerance is helpful, but too narrow if it recognizes only dramatic adverse events. Ocular surface toxicity is often cumulative. Slide 6, please. Glaucoma is a lifelong disease, and treatment may continue for decades. If policy assumes that chronic topical therapy must always come first and non-topical therapy only after repeated failure, it may prioritize historical sequence over real-world outcomes. Clinicians should be allowed to individualize therapy based on adherence risk, ocular surface disease, disease severity, life expectancy, and likelihood of progression. There is also an equity issue. The supplemental evidence exhibit I will submit includes national registry and cost barrier studies showing that complex adherence-dependent pathways disproportionately burden patients with fewer resources and greater risk of being lost to follow-up. Rigid step therapy may appear neutral on paper, but it creates an additional pharmacy visits, authorizations, clinic visits, procedures, and observation intervals before reliable treatment is delivered. Slide 7, please. This brings me to iDose TR, the travoprost intracameral implant, as a sustained-release, non-patient-dependent treatment. The pivotal phase 3 trials of iDose were randomized, multi-center, and double-masked. Singh and colleagues reported sustained pressure lowering that was non-inferior to twice-daily timolol, a standard comparator. Berdahl and colleagues reported that at 36 months, 69% of implant patients were controlled on the same or fewer topical medications, compared with only 45% in the timolol group. Bacharach and colleagues addressed another important question. What happens compared with patients' prior topical prostaglandin monotherapy? The implant achieved greater IOP reduction than their pre-study topical prostaglandin. I do not interpret that as proof that travoprost becomes a stronger molecule inside the eye. I interpret it as evidence that continuous, reliable delivery can outperform real-world topical therapy. That is precisely the clinical policy clinical problem this policy must recognize. This is an intraocular procedure, and it has risks. Endothelial safety, inflammation, infection, and proper patient selection matter. I am not asking Palmetto to ignore safeguards. I am asking that safeguards reflect current evidence and labeling. The Berdahl exchange study reported feasible implant exchange without treatment-related serious adverse events and with stable endothelial findings. The FDA subsequently updated the iDose TR label to permit readministration, with endothelial cell monitoring and recommended frequency limits. I also want to address a possible misconception that Durysta, the bimatoprost intracameral implant, is an adequate substitute if iDose TR access is narrowed. It is not. FDA's labeling for Durysta limits treatment to a single implant per eye without retreatment because of possible corneal endothelial cell loss and increased corneal risk with multiple implants. By contrast, the current iDose TR label provides a defined pathway for readministration. This is not a claim of head-to-head superiority. It is a regulatory and clinical distinction. Durysta is a one-time treatment and cannot substitute for a repeatable option in a lifelong disease. I also strongly object to the proposed prohibition on combining iDose with minimally invasive glaucoma surgery, also called MIGS. MIGS procedures lower pressure by surgically improving aqueous outflow. iDose is not a MIGS procedure. It is a procedural pharmaceutical delivery system. Treating them as duplicative misunderstands the strategy. They are not redundant. They are complementary. MIGS attempts to improve the patient's outflow system. iDose provides sustained pharmacologic therapy through a different mechanism, independent of daily adherence and independent of whether or not the MIGS response is robust. Combining them can therefore address two distinct mechanisms during one operative encounter. That matters because MIGS outcome depend on the patient's physiology. If the outflow response is inadequate, an approach combined with iDose still provides sustained prostaglandin therapy. Prohibiting that combination will force some patients to return to the operating room for another procedure with additional anesthesia, recovery, claims, family burden, and delay before a reliable IOP control is achieved. This is about avoiding fragmented care and dependence on a single physiologic response that may not be sufficient. I am not requesting indiscriminate combination surgery. I am asking that the LCD not categorically prohibit physician judgment when combining iDose with MIGS, is medically reasonable. There is far more supporting evidence than can be reviewed today. After the meeting, I will submit written comments by email with the supplemental evidence exhibit attached, providing Palmetto direct, source-traceable support. My request is practical. Do not require every patient to fail multiple drops and then fail SLT in a rigid sequence. Recognize adherence risk, medication burden, ocular surface disease, intolerance, cost barriers, and cognitive or functional limitations. Do not make failed SLT mandatory in every case. Do not treat Durysta as an adequate chronic substitute for a repeatable implant. And do not categorically prohibit combining iDose with MIGS when complementary treatment is medically appropriate and advantageous. I will close by returning to the eye drop instruction sheet. It represents the complexity we ask elderly patients to manage every day. It represents why a medication may fail even when a molecule works. And it represents why adherence-independent therapy matters to protect Medicare patients from blindness. Medicare beneficiaries are trying to preserve the ability to read, drive, walk safely, recognize faces, and remain independent. We should not require patients to prove repeatedly that adherence-dependent therapy is failing before allowing an adherence-independent therapy designed to solve that problem. We should not mistake delivery system failure for pharmacologic failure. And we should not force patients into separate surgical encounters when one rational encounter can address complementary mechanisms of eye pressure lowering. For those reasons, I respectfully request that the LCD be revised to preserve flexible, physician-guided use of the travoprost intracameral implant when medically reasonable and necessary for the individual Medicare beneficiary. Submitting every piece of evidence refuting the draft policy is simply not feasible in this forum, but the supplemental evidence exhibit I will submit accompanying my written comments will provide a focused record supporting these objections. Thank you for your time and for the opportunity to comment.
Thank you, Dr. Garza. Our next speaker will be Dr. McAllister.
Hello, my name is John McAllister. I practice comprehensive ophthalmology in Northern Virginia. My practice, my personal practice, provides ophthalmic services in Palmetto's region, as well as Novitas's region. But I'm presenting today in my capacity as the American Academy of Ophthalmology's Secretary for Federal Affairs. And I'm very grateful for the opportunity to speak to you today. Next slide. I have no relevant disclosures. Please, next slide. We sincerely appreciate Palmetto's thoughtful work evaluating new therapies and are grateful for the opportunity to present our feedback on the proposed LCD. Our goal today is to share targeted feedback to help ensure policy development aligns with the current evidence and real-world clinical practice. There is only one product on the market right now that the LCD applies to, and that is iDose TR. So forgive me for referring occasionally to this procedural sustained drug delivery technology by the name of the only available product on the market at times. Next slide, please. We appreciate the recognition that the FDA-approved drug-eluting system is reasonable and necessary for the management of ocular hypertension and open-angle glaucoma, both as a standalone procedure and when combined with cataract surgery. However, several provisions in the proposed LCD may go beyond the currently available evidence and could unintentionally limit physician flexibility and patient access. Next slide, please. We at the Academy believe an LCD for an FDA-approved drug with a recently expanded indication for repeat administration may be occurring before sufficient clinical experience is available, creating a risk that the policy might outpace the evolving evidence. We believe it is premature to develop a local coverage determination for iDose TR, which again is the only product on the market to which this LCD would apply. Long-term data are needed regarding its impact on glaucoma progression and monitoring for safety endpoints, especially with regards to the corneal endothelium. Ophthalmologists are also still determining how best to use this treatment for their patients. As it is our understanding that additional studies are in process, we strongly recommend to not finalize the proposed LCD and pause its development until more data are available. In the meantime, we recommend claims be adjudicated on a case-by-case basis. If the LCD is not rescinded, then significant revisions to the policy are necessary. Next slide, please. Thank you. The step therapy structure is also a concern for us. Requiring both multiple medications and a selective laser trabeculoplasty does not reflect real-world care, where SLT, although certainly first-line therapy, is not appropriate for every patient. Greater flexibility would better support individualized care. Next slide, please. The step therapy requirement does not reflect optimal standards of care for patients, as a patient who has failed 2 drops and SLT is less likely to benefit from a treatment like this drug-eluting system and is more likely to need incisional glaucoma surgery. The typical first-line medicated drop choice is a prostaglandin analog, which is the same drug category that is eluted from this technology currently. So patients who have demonstrated an inadequate response to this medication class are not likely to benefit from implantation. This medication will most likely help those who have responded favorably to, rather than fail, the prostaglandin analogs. It will help those who have difficulty administering the prostaglandin analog or demonstrate non-compliance with the regimen or are responsive to IOP lowering effect, but intolerant to the topical administration due to either dry eye syndrome or toxicity from preservative in the eye drop, benzalkonium chloride. We recommend revising the LCD history of failed medical management criteria to only one topical drop instead of two. Additionally, although the LIGHT trial has established SLT as a first-line therapy and increasingly it is being used as first-line therapy, many patients are still not good candidates for or are unwilling to undergo laser trabeculoplasty. We recommend that the criteria language be changed from requirements 1 and 2 to requirements 1 or 2, which would allow the patient to have a history of failed medical management with drops or a history of failed SLT before iDose TR is considered reasonable and necessary. Next slide, please. Thank you. This could readily ease the burden for a patient, and there is strong evidence for the efficacy and safety of iDose TR in combination with cataract surgery, and there is evolving evidence for iDose TR and cataract surgery and other glaucoma surgeries. Due to the evolving evidence, we feel it is premature to limit the coverage of implantation of this technology when performed concomitantly with other eye surgeries or procedures and cataract surgery. 3-month combined data are available, and we understand that additional data are expected in 2027. We recommend removing limitation 1 and considering coverage on a case-by-case basis. As more literature become available, the coverage policy should be revisited. Next slide, please. We believe that there may be a potential typo in the reimplantation time requirement, which states that 2 years must elapse prior to reimplantation. The reference for this limitation is number 14, the FDA package insert, and it states that, quote, it is not recommended to re-administer an iDose TR more than once per year, end quote. We recommend a correction to limitation number 3 to clarify the frequency limitation is 1 and not 2 years. Next slide, please. Thank you. The endothelial cell density limitation raises practical concerns. The specular microscopy test is not widely available to most physician offices. This technology has historically been only used in the research setting, and not every academic center has one available. Most clinicians in the industry do not use specular microscopy clinically, so a strict requirement could limit access, and we recommend or suggest allowing clinical judgment where testing is not available. We recommend revising limitation number 4 to allow currently utilized methods of assessing corneal health, including detailed slit lamp exam and corneal thickness measurements via pachymetry, both as more readily clinically available assessments of corneal health. Next slide, thank you. So when these requirements are taken together, they create a high cumulative threshold for access and significant limitations on real-world clinical application. And this will delay appropriate treatment and limit access to care, which is particularly concerning in a progressive disease like glaucoma, where vision loss is irreversible. Next slide, please. Thanks. Our organizations believe that the most appropriate path forward is to rescind the proposed LCD and pause coverage policy development until more literature is available. However, if Palmetto is unable to rescind the proposal, then we respectfully recommend targeted refinements that increase flexibility in step therapy coverage indications, consider 1 drop instead of 2, considering changing SLT criteria from and to or. Remove limitation number 1 and consider coverage with concomitant cataract surgery and with other eye procedures on a case-by-case basis. Consider revising limitation number 4 to allow clinically appropriate assessment methods, and correct limitation number 3 to reflect the 1-year reimplantation limit. Our shared goal is a policy that supports appropriate evidence-aligned patient access. Thank you genuinely for the hard work you're putting into this LCD process, and thank you again for your time today and the opportunity to comment. Our organizations will submit formal comments prior to the July 4th deadline and include PDF copies of any additional literature. Thank you again.
Thank you, Dr. McAllister. Up next will be Dr. Ballast as our next speaker.
My name is Zach Ballast, and I'm a comprehensive ophthalmologist based out of Gainesville, Georgia. Thank you for the opportunity to comment on the proposed LCT today. I'm also the current president of the Georgia Society of Ophthalmology, and I'm here today representing the society as well as myself. So I'd like to begin by discussing key differences between selective laser trabeculoplasty and iDose. First, we need to understand that intraocular pressure regulation is a complex process with different outflow pathways that work in tandem. Currently available treatment options target these various pathways to produce the desired effect of lowering intraocular pressure. This is important because lowering the intraocular pressure is the only modifiable risk factor for glaucoma. Trials such as the Early Manifest Glaucoma trial, the Collaborative Initial Glaucoma Treatment Study, and the LIGHT trial have shown that lowering IOP prevents or delays progression of glaucoma. Also of significant importance, the United Kingdom Glaucoma Treatment Study, the Early Manifest Glaucoma trial, and the Ocular Hypertension Treatment Study have provided strong evidence that earlier treatment significantly delays disease onset and reduces visual field deterioration. SLT and iDose are treatment options that lower intraocular pressure with favorable safety profiles. However, these treatments act through different mechanisms that target complementary outflow pathways. SLT utilizes laser energy to target the trabecular meshwork pathway. iDose utilizes pharmacologic therapy to target the uveoscleral pathway. Because their mechanisms of action are different, a patient's response to SLT does not predict their response to iDose and vice versa. Requiring SLT as a prerequisite effectively uses response to one pathway as a gatekeeper for a treatment targeting a different pathway. This may delay or even preclude treatment for many patients that have a progressive, vision-threatening condition. And as mentioned earlier, we have strong evidence that earlier treatment reduces disease progression and vision loss. A major concern with this proposal is that although SLT is a great treatment option, many patients may have real-world barriers. There are many patients that may not be a candidate for or may not be able to undergo SLT, yet could still be appropriate candidates for iDose. As a result, requiring SLT as a prerequisite could unnecessarily limit access to a treatment that may be beneficial for these patients. A survey by the American Glaucoma Society revealed some physician-reported real-world barriers to SLT. Some of these common limitations of this procedure include lack of accessibility, as this procedure requires specialized laser equipment and a physician capable of performing the procedure. Frequently, patients do not have anatomy that allow adequate visualization of the anatomic structures, which is required for treatment. There is also an inability to modify or manipulate this anatomy during SLT, which is unlike surgery, where we often have the ability to gain access to the trabecular meshwork through surgical manipulation. SLT requires a great deal of precision and patient cooperation. This is often difficult or unachievable, especially in Medicare populations where patients are more likely to have mobility limitations that won't allow them to position for a laser procedure that can take 5 to 10 minutes to complete. They can also have tremors or difficulty maintaining stability. Cognitive impairment is another issue that can prevent SLT from being completed. Because of these frequent limitations, treatment options should not rely solely on SLT eligibility. I would also like to stress the importance of individualized treatment decisions in glaucoma. Glaucoma is a variable disease and management is nuanced and extremely personalized. Rigid treatment rules may preclude optimal options. Physician judgment and physician-patient decision-making for each individual patient is critical for achieving the best patient outcomes. The treating physician is best positioned to determine whether medication, SLT, or sustained drug delivery is the most appropriate next step for an individual patient. In fact, the American Academy of Ophthalmology preferred practice pattern for primary open-angle glaucoma supports individualized glaucoma management rather than a single mandatory treatment sequence for all patients. We also have real-world SLT data that shows response and durability vary across patients, so SLT should remain an option rather than a universal coverage requirement. Another consideration in this discussion is the issue of medication compliance. Studies have shown that medication compliance is a major obstacle in glaucoma management, and treatment options such as iDose can help alleviate this. The study referenced here has shown that greater than 90% of patients did not refill their glaucoma drops continuously over a period of 3 years, and approximately 50% of patients stopped taking their prescribed medications within 6 months. We also know from the Collaborative Initial Glaucoma Treatment Study Group that poor adherence is associated with disease progression and vision loss. Glaucoma-related vision loss leads to increased risk of falls, loss of independence, and increased healthcare utilization among Medicare beneficiaries. iDose is a sensible option for patients that are known to respond well and tolerate prostaglandins, as this treatment pathway is well known to slow progression of this life-changing disease. I can't stress this enough, but earlier and sustained IOP control is associated with reduced risk of disease progression. Restricting access until multiple treatment failures occur may unnecessarily expose beneficiaries to irreversible vision loss. So next, I wanted to present some scenarios that demonstrate the unintended consequences of the proposed rules. So patient A is a patient with moderate open-angle glaucoma. They're well controlled on a prostaglandin, which is the same medication that is in the iDose when taken as prescribed, but they have difficulty remembering the drops. The patient does not want to have a laser procedure, which is probably more common than you think. Patients are often hesitant when hearing the word laser. So under the proposed LCD, the patient would be required to either undergo SLT despite being controlled with prostaglandin therapy when they are adherent, or be ineligible for iDose. Patient B has Parkinson's disease with difficulty administering drops due to a tremor. This tremor also results in the patient being unable to hold steady for SLT, thus making them a poor candidate. So should this patient lose access to lose access because SLT cannot be safely performed? Patient C had prior SLT, but a poor response. They do have good IOP response to prostaglandin drops. So again, should this patient require additional medication failures before implanting a device that delivers the same therapy continuously? So in summary, we support coverage of iDose because it provides sustained prostaglandin therapy through a proven mechanism. It addresses a major barrier in glaucoma care, which is medication adherence. It offers an alternative for patients who are poor candidates for SLT, and failure of SLT does not predict response to prostaglandin therapy. We would request the following LCD modifications: removal of mandatory SLT prerequisite and removal of requirement of failure for 2 medications plus SLT. We would request that you allow physician-directed selection of either a medication trial or SLT based on individual patient circumstances. In closing, the American Academy of Ophthalmology Technology Assessment describes SLT as a primary, replacement, or adjunctive therapy, supporting physician discretion rather than mandatory SLT failure before other treatment options. Coverage policy should support individualized glaucoma care rather than impose a single treatment sequence for all beneficiaries. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Blest. Our next speaker is Dr. Yagorov.
Thank you, everybody. This is Arkady Yadgorov. I'm a glaucoma specialist in private practice in Atlanta, Georgia. And I'll be further discussing the importance of preserving physician flexibility in glaucoma care. As the prior presentations by my colleagues illustrate, glaucoma management requires a highly individualized and nuanced clinical approach. It does not always align neatly with rigid step therapy algorithms. And so coverage policies, I feel should be less restrictive and allow the physicians the flexibility to exercise our clinical judgment in directing patient care. But more importantly, what I'm going to emphasize is the fundamental flaw in limitation number 1, which appears to conflate MIGS procedures with iDose. Next slide. And despite their distinct mechanisms, the policy suggests that there's a misunderstanding of the clinical distinctions between these 2 treatment options. So as you can see here, MIGS is a glaucoma surgery per se. It's really it's a manipulation of the outflow system. And in such, if you think of it as a plumbing problem, fluid has a hard time exiting the eye. And therefore, MIGS is a way to improve the outflow of fluid out of the eye. So therefore, with glaucoma, as we know, is a trabecular dysfunction or a outflow problem. MIGS solves that solution by improving the outflow. The primary goal is to lower IOP, through the improved outflow, not necessarily to reduce medication. That sometimes is a secondary gain, but is never the primary goal. And the MIGS policy for standalone had been approved and had coverage and discusses refractory glaucoma and the need for reduction of IOP as the primary intent. iDose, on the other hand, is not a MIGS procedure. It's a completely separate category. They have little to none to do with each other. As it does not alter anatomy, we are not cutting any type of trabecular outflow tissue. We're not manipulating in any way to improve outflow. And it really is simply a intracameral slow-releasing implant that delivers medication so that the patient does not have to if they have difficulties with topical drops. So lowering of IOP is through a medication effect rather than a structural intervention. So if we just take a case presentation here and look at a very, very common sometimes presentation of a patient, we'll go through this, but I really urge the Palmetto doctors that are listening to understand here, this limitation ultimately does not allow me to proceed with this patient to give them what they need, essentially, which is two different things. So let me explain. So here's a patient profile. This is a patient that comes to me on one medication, which is typically latanoprost. It's the most common market leader in terms of drug usage. Pressure is 21, and I consider that this is as a suboptimal pressure goal for the patient. In other words, the IOP needs to be lowered further. Otherwise, the patient's at risk of progressive glaucoma. But more importantly, additionally, in this clinical scenario, this patient is coming in with ocular irritation and red eye, which is a class effect of topical glaucoma medications, especially topical prostaglandins, and has dexterity issues. And so you can see just straight off the bat, as a physician, as a glaucoma specialist taking care of this patient, this is not a patient that would do well with going down what the policy recommends. Well, why don't you try a second medicine or a third? If there's dexterity issues, it doesn't really make sense to now subjugate this patient to additional medications. Additionally, there's significant studies and evidence that suggest that ocular surface disease worsens with additional medication. Furthermore, if we had just recommended an iDose, right? So we've all agree here that ocular surface disease is an issue, dexterity is an issue. An iDose would simply help this patient's quality of life and reduce the amount of non-adherence and issues and intolerances this patient has. It will not significantly improve their drainage, their outflow. That's where their disease is. And therefore, in this real-world approach, I would choose a multimodal strategy. I would provide a MIGS procedure in addition to an iDose. Currently, the way the policy stands, I would have to have this patient undergo two separate OR trips. One to create a MIG, to provide a MIGS procedure to improve their IOP, which is for their refractory glaucoma situation, and then have them go back to the operating room to perform an iDose procedure to improve their quality of life, reduce their ocular surface redness, and alleviate the dexterity issues that come with topical glaucoma medicines. And I think this case is just a very, very clear example of why limitation number one in the policy is a flawed limitation, because iDose has nothing to do with MIGS. And possibly there's confusion that, there had been a previous limitation on a MIGS policy about combination MIGS, which are two different MIGS, and a limitation on that. And that is more understandable. But in this case, having a limitation of iDose not being allowed with a MIGS is a huge disservice to patients and doctors trying to do what's best for Medicare beneficiaries. Next slide. In terms of real world, or in terms of data in general, there is emerging data that supports multimodal glaucoma management. Of course, it is retrospective, but just understand that these are two separate modalities of treatment. They are not, they're not one and the same, and therefore the data is really not trying to show that there needs to be a control. The data simply is trying to show that there is a safe way to achieve our goal, which is MIGS improving of IOP and iDose of improving medication reduction. And very recently, two papers were published, one in which I was an author, that substantially show just a fantastic safety profile that's favorable to patients. And I think you're going to see this, that a lot of doctors are this is going to make sense. And this limitation is ultimately going to hinder patient access to a very safe and effective separate mechanistic type of treatment for glaucoma. So ultimately, I urge the team at Medicare, at the Palmetto, to reconsider that limitation and allow for concomitant use. Essentially, they both provide Medicare beneficiaries a significant therapeutic effect and reduction in possibility of both glaucoma progression and substantially worsening of quality of life. FDA labeling is not overly restrictive, and some of my colleagues have talked about that. Is, for example, the 2-year repeat treatment really ought to say 1 year based on the FDA labeling. And iDose is extremely safe when it comes to endothelial cell density. If you actually look at the data, there is nothing that shows that endothelial cell data progressively worsens over many years, which was a concern from supraciliary shunt called the CyPass, which showed progressive loss of endothelial cell loss. iDose shows nothing of that sort in the data. In fact, it was approved for exchange just because of the safety of the endothelial cell data. So you can see here that this LCD is extremely restrictive and doesn't reflect really the potential that this iDose can provide in terms of therapeutic benefit to our patients in the Palmetto region. Next slide. Thank you for listening.
Our next presenter will be the add-on presenter from this morning's earlier open meeting. It'll be Dr. Schodel. Dr. Schodel, if you're on, you can go ahead. While we are waiting for our last presenter, I'll just reiterate that written comments may continue to be submitted at the email address of b.policy@palmettogba.com. And these must be submitted by July 4th, on or before July 4th.
It's being recorded. Hello, this is Dr. Shadle.
Oh, Dr. Shadle, this is Dr. Hopkins. Glad you could make it. You are our final presenter for the day. If you are ready, you can go ahead. If you need a second, let me know.
No, I am ready. Thank you so much for, I tried getting a call in earlier today and had some issues. I'm actually in the operating room today, so I really appreciate the opportunity to talk on behalf of iDose. Yeah, so I've got a bunch of patients that have all sorts of issues with like dexterity and Parkinson's, and or they've got intolerance to these glaucoma drops, and it's a huge burden on either the patients or their families to be able to try to get some of these drops in them. We know that the more that I ask a patient to do drops, the more quantity and volume that we have, the less likely it is that they will adhere to whatever it is that I'm recommending. And so having the ability to give the patient a medicine on the inside of their eye where I could take out of the equation whether or not they are able, to remember or get them in from a dexterity perspective is very helpful. And glaucoma is a pretty terrible disease to treat, especially in the late stages. An ounce of prevention is worth a ton of cure. And if we can kind of change the trajectory of their disease process, so that we can avoid doing tubes and trabs, our patient's going to be so much more happy. In that line, I don't think there should be any restrictions on having iDose with other minimally invasive glaucoma surgeries. It's a drug. It's not a surgery itself, and there's no medical contraindication why you couldn't have those. Similarly, to have a patient fail any number of medicines if they're having drop intolerance or dexterity issues, or even Alzheimer's. I don't think that makes sense too when I try to give this from a patient-centered perspective of how can I most adequately treat my glaucoma patients the way I would want to be treated myself or a family member treated. The surgery that I just did was a leaky bleb with a blebitis, and something like that can take away a person's vision permanently. And I'm hoping that we can do a lot less of these filtration surgeries by increasing the frequency of minimally invasive interventions that we can do early on to avoid Herculean measures later on. And I really appreciate the time to be able to voice that those thoughts.
Great, thank you, Dr. Shadle. I apologize.
And is the form such that there are any questions or any interaction, or is it just kind of a statement?
it's just presentations like you just gave. That was perfect.
Excellent.
But yeah, we appreciate your insight. You were our last presenter for the afternoon. So this concludes our presentations for the open meeting. Written comments can be submitted to b.policy@palmettogba.com, and these have to be in on or before July 4th. Thank you, everybody, for attending, and this concludes our meeting. Thank you.